His wife divorced him for her coworker, served him the papers at her mother's Sunday dinner table in front of 14 people while the sweet potato pie was still warm. She called it an upgrade. Her mother called him temporary. And the man she left him for, the one with the Northwestern MBA and the VP title and the corner office, had been unknowingly punching a clock under her husband's name for 5 years without ever once knowing whose company signed his checks. What none of them knew, not the wife, not her mother, not the man she chose instead, was that the quiet man they humiliated over Sunday dinner controlled 34% of Midwest freight infrastructure, held $2.3 billion in liquid assets, and sat at the top of a $42 billion empire that the entire Whitfield family had been, without knowing it, living inside of. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He finished his pie, drove home, past 3 trucks bearing his company's logo, and made one phone call. What happened next didn't just end a marriage, it dismantled a dynasty. So here is the question this story asks from the very first moment. What does a man do when he finally decides to let the world see exactly who he is? If you already know this story is going to be something, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And if you are new here, subscribe so you never miss what we put out. And drop your city in the comments. Yeah, where are you watching from today? We love knowing who is in the room with us. Now let me take you all the way back to where this started, to a Sunday afternoon on Chicago's South Shore, to a dining room that smelled like candied yams and old money and 12 years of a good man's patience finally running out. The house on Euclid Avenue smelled the same every Sunday. Candied yams and pressed hair, and the particular kind of furniture polish Patricia Whitfield used on wood that had never needed polishing, because everything in that house existed to be seen, not touched. Teddy Beaumont had fixed the kitchen faucet that morning. Not because anyone asked, not because anyone would notice. He had heard it dripping when he arrived at 11, gone under the sink without a word, and had it running clean before Patricia finished arranging the good plates. He set his tools back in his truck, washed his hands at the newly quiet faucet, and carried his sweet potato pie to the table like a man who belonged there. He did not belong there, not according to Patricia, not according to anyone in that dining room except the 14 people who were too polite to say it out loud. And they weren't that polite. The table ran long. Patricia sat at the head of it, the way she sat at everything, like a judgment. Her daughters flanked her. Her sons-in-law occupied the satellite positions that men in this family were assigned by unspoken rule. Cousins, aunts, one great-uncle who had not spoken directly to Teddy in 11 years. They filled the chairs between. The good china was out. The good silverware was out. Gospel had been playing on the kitchen radio since 9 in the morning, and by noon it had been replaced by the sound of Patricia holding court. Yvonne sat 3 chairs from Teddy and did not look at him once during the blessing. That was not unusual. What was unusual was the way she held her phone under the table throughout the meal, thumb moving in short, careful strokes, face arranged in the particular expression she wore when she was waiting for something. Teddy noticed. He noticed the way a man notices weather. Not with alarm, but with the quiet recognition that conditions are changing. He passed the rolls when they reached him. He complimented Patricia's pot roast, which was genuinely good. He answered questions about his work, logistics. Yes, still with the same firm, no, nothing exciting to report, with the practiced brevity of a man who had learned that the full answer was not wanted. The pie was cleared from the table in stages. The conversation moved the way it always moved in that house, Patricia directing traffic, cousins providing colour, everyone performing their assigned role in the Whitfield family production of Sunday dinner. The knock at the front door came at 12:47. Patricia's youngest niece answered it as the girl was closest. She came back to the dining room doorway with an expression no one could immediately read, followed by a man in a grey jacket holding a manila envelope and looking at Yvonne. Yvonne did not look surprised. She looked relieved. The man said Theodore Beaumont's name clearly because legal documents require clarity, and held the envelope toward the center of the table. Teddy set down his fork. He took the envelope. He opened it slowly in the way of a man who already knows the shape of bad news and sees no reason to rush toward it. 14 people watched him read. The dining room had gone the particular kind of quiet that happens when everyone present knows something one person is only just learning and has been waiting for the learning to happen. It was the quiet of a room full of witnesses who came prepared. Teddy read the first page, he read the second. He set the papers flat beside his plate. Patricia spoke before Yvonne did. That was also not unusual. She said she had always known this day would come. She said some things were not meant to last, and some people were not meant to hold certain things. She said, in the voice she used for pronouncements at church and at family gatherings and at every room she had ever decided to command, that she had always told her daughter Teddy was temporary. That was the word she used, temporary. And around that table, in that house, among those 14 people, there was the sound of agreement, not loud, not cruel in the way cruelty announces itself, but present, affirming, social, and total. Teddy looked at Patricia for a moment. Then he looked at the papers. Then he said, quietly, and without theatre, that he would have his attorney respond. The table laughed. Patricia's laugh was the loudest, carrying the particular music of a woman who finds something genuinely funny. She said, "What attorney?" She said it the way people say things they consider to be unanswerable questions. Teddy picked up his fork. He finished his sweet potato pie. He thanked Patricia for the pot roast, which was still genuinely good. He folded the envelope under his arm, carried his plate to the kitchen, washed it by hand the way his grandmother taught him, and left without another word to anyone. The drive home took 22 minutes on the southbound stretch of the Dan Ryan. He was 11 minutes in when he saw them. 3 semi-trucks running north in close formation, their trailers painted the same deep red with gold lettering along the side, the logo clean and identical on all 3, his company's colors, his company's trucks, moving through the Chicago night like they had somewhere to be. Teddy watched them pass. He let out one slow breath. He did not accelerate. He did not slow down. He simply watched them go and then turned his eyes back to the road ahead. He pulled into his driveway at 7 minutes past 1. He turned off the engine. He sat in the dark car without moving, the envelope on the passenger seat beside him, the house quiet and waiting ahead. He sat there for a long time. Theodore Beaumont grew up in Englewood with 3 things: his grandmother's expectations, a twin bed he shared with nobody because she made sure of it, and hunger. Not the dramatic kind people write about, the ordinary kind, the kind that makes a boy learn to read contracts before he learns to drive because his grandmother told him that the only thing standing between a man and the world taking everything from him was knowing exactly what he had signed. Her name was Odessa. She worked 41 years at the same dry cleaner on Halstead and saved money the way other people saved breath, carefully, consistently, without ever believing it would run out. When she died, she left Teddy $22,000 in a savings account and a note that said, "Do something they can't ignore." He was 23 when she passed. He enrolled in community college the following semester and took every business and logistics course they offered, then transferred to finish his degree at night while working days at a regional freight yard. He was not the smartest man in any of his classes. He was the most prepared. There is a difference, and Teddy understood it early. At 26, he won his first freight contract. A mid-size manufacturer in Joliet needed cold chain transport across 3 states and had posted the tender publicly. Teddy spent 11 weeks building his bid. He used Odessa's $22,000 to secure the equipment lease, registered a holding company in Delaware under the name of a numbered entity his night school professor had walked him through, and submitted a proposal that undercut every competitor by 14% without sacrificing a single margin that mattered. He won. That first contract paid $340,000 over 18 months. He reinvested every cent. The second contract came faster, the third came with a phone call instead of a tender. By the time Theodore Beaumont was 30 years old, Beaumont Logistics Group was moving freight through 7 states and generating $12 million in annual revenue, and not a single person in his personal life knew it existed. The anonymity was intentional, not out of shame, out of architecture. He had watched enough men in his neighborhood have their resources stripped by people who moved close the moment money appeared. He kept the Delaware structure clean, kept the operating subsidiaries insulated, and kept his personal name off every document that touched the real numbers. To the world that knew him socially, he was Theodore Beaumont, logistics manager. Reliable. Unremarkable. The kind of man you stop asking about his work because the answer is never interesting. He met Yvonne Whitfield at a charity dinner he attended on behalf of a freight industry association. She was composed, quick, and wore the kind of confidence that looks like it was issued at birth. He fell for her in the way quiet men fall, completely and without announcing it. They dated for 8 months before he proposed. He met her family the second weekend they were together. Patricia Whitfield welcomed him the way a customs official welcomes a suspicious package, with formal courtesy and underlying scrutiny. She asked about his family, his education, his career, in that order, and when his answers landed without the credentials she was calibrating for, something behind her eyes went carefully neutral. She did not say anything unkind that first evening. She didn't need to. The silence between her questions carried the verdict. Teddy made a decision on the drive home. He would not tell Yvonne about BLG, not yet. He told himself it was because the relationship was new. Then he told himself it was because he wanted to be loved for the right reasons. Both of those things were true. The third reason, the one he did not say out loud, was that he could already see what Patricia would do with the information, and he was not ready to watch his grandmother's life insurance become a Whitfield talking point. So the cover story held: the ordinary car, the ordinary apartment, the $94,000 salary drawn from one of BLG's operating subsidiaries and deposited into a personal account that reflected nothing of what he actually owned. Yvonne never asked to see his pay stubs. The Whitfields never asked for documentation. They had already formed their opinion of Teddy Beaumont, and documentation would only complicate a conclusion they had already reached. The early years of the marriage were genuinely good, or at least Teddy experienced them that way. He cooked on Sundays, he remembered her family's birthdays, he fixed things in their apartment, in Patricia's house, in the church van that the congregation relied on for the elderly members who couldn't drive. He fixed things because he was raised to, and because he believed, in the way good men believe things longer than they should, that being useful would eventually translate into being valued. It did not. Patricia's contempt was never explosive. It was structural. It lived in the way she described Teddy to other people at the table. "My daughter's husband," she would say, with a pause before the word husband that contained a full editorial. It lived in the way family decisions were made around him without consulting him, and then announced to him as though he should be grateful for the update. By year 4, BLG had executed its third major acquisition. Teddy sat in a downtown office on a Tuesday evening, alone, and signed the paperwork that brought a regional cold chain operator with 38 trucks and 4 state contracts into BLG's portfolio for $61 million. He signed with his left hand, the way he always did, when he was tired. He drove home to a dinner that was already plated, a television already on, and a wife who asked if he wanted more rice before returning to her phone. No one asked about his day. No one ever did. The acquisition he signed that evening would matter more than anyone at that dinner table could imagine. Pacing begins to accelerate from this chapter forward. The slow burn is over. The offices of Hargrove and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, where the windows faced the lake and the carpet was thick enough to swallow sound entirely. Teddy had been coming here for 19 years. He knew the receptionist's name, Lorraine, who had been there longer than most of the associates. And she knew his, and she said it the way people say the names of people who matter. Not warmly, exactly, precisely. The way you say the name of someone whose time you understand to have value. He had not told anyone he was coming. He had simply called Franklin Hargrove on the Monday morning after the Sunday dinner, said he needed a full portfolio review in connection with a divorce filing, and arrived at 9 o'clock with the envelope still in his jacket pocket. Franklin Hargrove was 57 years old and had the energy of a man who had never once been surprised by a legal document. He was already at the conference table when Teddy walked in, 2 associates flanking him, a stack of bound folders arranged with the precision of a man who had been preparing since the call. He shook Teddy's hand, gestured to the chair across from him, and got directly to it. The full picture took 40 minutes to lay out. Franklin walked it floor by floor the way you walk a building, starting at the foundation and moving upward. The Delaware Holding Company, the operating subsidiaries beneath it. The asset schedule. 31 wholly owned entities, 14 partial holdings, 4 real estate positions, and the flagship. Beaumont Logistics Group itself, valued at $42 billion across its most recent independent assessment. Liquid assets, $2.3 billion, annual operating revenue, $6.8 billion, market share of Midwest freight infrastructure, 34%. Teddy had lived inside these numbers for years, but hearing them read aloud in a formal setting, laid across a conference table in bound documents, had a different weight. It was the weight of reality that has stopped being hidden. Franklin moved to the divorce asset picture. Yvonne's attorney had filed a financial disclosure request based on Teddy's personal tax returns, the ones reflecting the $94,000 logistics manager salary, the ordinary bank account, the unremarkable financial profile of a man of modest means. They had no visibility into BLG's structure. The Delaware registration was clean, the holding entities were insulated. Yvonne's legal team was, Franklin said without any particular satisfaction, operating on approximately 2% of the relevant information. Then Franklin turned to the subsidiary schedule. He placed a single page on the table and moved it toward Teddy. It was the full list of BLG's wholly owned acquisitions organized by year of purchase. Franklin pointed to the 2019 column, third entry from the top. Meridian Supply Chain Solutions, acquired June 2019. Purchase price, $340 million. Status, wholly owned subsidiary. Current annual revenue contribution, $412 million. Teddy read the name twice. He had signed the Meridian acquisition from a hotel room in Cincinnati during a conference he had attended under his cover identity. It had been a routine transaction, a mid-size freight consultancy with a strong client list and a clean balance sheet, acquired to strengthen BLG's advisory division. He had never had a reason to connect it to anything in his personal life. The company had 530 employees across 4 offices. He did not know their names. He knew one of them now Franklin pulled Garrison Whitmore's employment record from a second folder, obtained through BLG's HR infrastructure, which Teddy had legal authority to access as the company's beneficial owner. Vice President of Client Strategy. Start date, August 2019, 2 months after the acquisition closed. Compensation, $340,000 annually plus performance bonus. The VP promotion had come in 2021, approved by Meridian's executive team, which reported through 2 layers of corporate structure to a board that answered to Theodore Beaumont. Garrison Whitmore had been Teddy's employee for 5 years. He had been collecting a salary from a company Teddy owned, depositing bonuses that Teddy's corporate structure authorized, printing business cards bearing a logo that Teddy's acquisition had purchased. And he had spent that time, apparently, helping Yvonne conclude that she had found someone better. Teddy sat with that for a moment. The room was very quiet. Then Franklin placed a third document on the table. The Whitfield Funeral Group transport contract. $4.7 million annually. Renewed quarterly through BLG's cold chain division. Next renewal date, 31 days from today. Patricia Whitfield had been calling him temporary for 12 years. She had been doing it while her business ran on his infrastructure, her transport capacity sustained by his trucks, her operating margin underwritten by a contract that bore his company's name in the fine print she had never read. Teddy leaned back in his chair. He thought briefly and without drama of the 3 red and gold trucks he had watched pass on the Dan Ryan the night his marriage ended. He understood now what he had felt watching them go. Not grief, not anger, recognition. He looked at Franklin across the table. He asked one question. "How clean can we make this?" Franklin held his gaze without blinking. Franklin's answer took 4 days to architect and 30 years to earn. He came back to Teddy on Tuesday morning with a yellow legal pad covered in his precise, unhurried handwriting, and a single statement delivered before he sat down. What they were about to do was entirely legal, entirely surgical, and would leave no fingerprints that pointed to Theodore Beaumont personally. Every action would flow through BLG's existing corporate mechanisms. Every notice would originate from the appropriate institutional division. The man on the other end of each envelope would never see Teddy's name on the return address. Not until Teddy was ready for them to. They worked through 4 tracks simultaneously. The first track was the divorce itself. Yvonne's attorney, a family law practitioner named Desmond Craig, who worked out of a Gold Coast office and advertised on the back of a transit magazine, had filed his financial disclosure request based entirely on Teddy's personal tax returns. Those returns reflected a $94,000 annual salary, a personal savings account, and a modest investment portfolio that Franklin had maintained as a deliberate decoy for exactly this kind of moment. Craig's team had no knowledge of BLG's Delaware structure. They did not know the holding company existed. They did not know the subsidiary network existed. They were building a divorce case on a financial portrait that captured roughly 0.25% of Teddy's actual position. Franklin had already filed BLG's corporate structure with the appropriate protective designations, ensuring that the marital estate, legally defined by what was accumulated jointly, was cleanly separated from assets Teddy had built under the holding company before and throughout the marriage. The legal insulation was airtight. When Craig's team eventually saw the full picture, Franklin said their options would be limited to accepting Teddy's terms or spending 3 years in a legal process they were not equipped to win. Track 1 was already decided. Yvonne's attorney just didn't know it yet. The second track was Garrison. Franklin had flagged something during the portfolio review that warranted a closer look. Garrison Whitmore's expense reports at Meridian had been submitted through the subsidiary's internal approval system. But 3 of his 4 revenue relationships, the ones he had used to justify his VP promotion in 2021, were client accounts that BLG's compliance records showed had been originated by other team members and subsequently reassigned to Garrison's portfolio through what appeared to be informal internal transfers. The numbers behind his performance metrics did not match the underlying activity. This was not Teddy's doing. Garrison had built his own trap years before anyone thought to look for it. Franklin initiated a formal executive review through BLG's compliance division on Tuesday afternoon. The review was standard procedure, the kind of routine audit that any holding company's legal team could initiate on any subsidiary without explanation or external visibility. The compliance team would examine Garrison's expense reports, client representations, and claimed revenue relationships going back to his first year at Meridian. The review was anonymous by design, no name attached, no visible origin. Just a procedurally unremarkable letter from BLG's compliance division to Meridian's HR department requesting full documentation on a flagged executive file. Track 2 was already moving. The third track was Patricia. The Whitfield Funeral Group transport contract was managed through BLG's cold chain operations division. A team of 12 people who administered service agreements across 3 states with no awareness of the ownership connection to any of Meridian's personnel or to Teddy's personal life. The contract renewal was 31 days out. Franklin drafted the non-renewal notice on Wednesday morning in language that was so standard, so procedural, so devoid of any human texture that it could have been generated by a machine. Strategic reallocation of cold chain transport assets in the relevant service corridors. Effective at the conclusion of the current contract term. No explanation required because the contract's renewal clause required none. The notice would be delivered through BLG's operations division. Patricia Whitfield would receive it addressed to the Whitfield Funeral Group's operations director. She would call the number on the letterhead. The number would connect to BLG's vendor services line. That line would confirm the non-renewal and decline to elaborate. Track 3 was clean. The 4th track was the quietest. During the portfolio review, Franklin's team had cross-referenced BLG's charitable foundation records and found a 2021 grant of $2.1 million issued to a Chicago nonprofit whose board of directors included, at the time of acceptance, Patricia Whitfield. The grant had been accepted without disclosure to the board's other members, in violation of the organization's own conflict of interest policy, a policy that Patricia herself had voted to ratify in 2019. The documentation was preserved. No action was required yet. It would be made available to the appropriate board members at the appropriate time through a channels Franklin described only as routine governance correspondence. On Friday morning, 4 envelopes left 4 separate offices across Chicago. None of them bore Teddy's name. Teddy spent that Friday the way he spent every Friday. He was at his desk by 7. He reviewed routing reports. He answered emails about a cold chain contract in Indianapolis that had nothing to do with anything the Whitfields would ever know about. He ate lunch alone at the diner 2 blocks from the office where he always ordered the turkey on wheat, and the woman behind the counter always had it ready before he reached the register. He drove home in the early evening. He did not think about Yvonne. He did not think about Garrison. He did not think about Patricia's face, or the dining room table, or the sound of 14 people finding his humiliation entertaining. He thought about Odessa, about a note that said, "Do something they can't ignore." By Monday, the first envelope had been opened, and nothing in the Whitfield world would be the same. The first envelope arrived at Meridian Supply Chain Solutions on a Monday morning. It was addressed to the Director of Human Resources. It came on BLG Compliance Division letterhead. Clean, formal, unremarkable. The kind of letter that large holding companies send to subsidiaries as a matter of routine. the kind of letter that HR directors receive and immediately escalate because they understand exactly what a formal executive review notice means and exactly what it will require them to do before the business day is over. Garrison Whitmore was called into HR at 11 that morning. He was placed on administrative leave by noon. His access badge stopped working at 12:30. His email was suspended at 12:31. He stood in the Meridian lobby holding a box of desk items and a look on his face like a man who had just been informed that gravity had been quietly repealed. He called his attorney from the parking garage. He called Yvonne from the car. She told him it was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. It was not a mistake. Teddy spent that Monday at his desk reviewing routing reports. He ate lunch at the diner. He drove home in the early evening. He did not check the news. Day 3. The non-renewal notice reached the Whitfield Funeral Group's operations director by certified mail on a Wednesday afternoon. $4.7 million in annual transport services terminated at the end of the current contract period. Strategic reallocation of cold chain assets. Standard language. No room for negotiation. Patricia found out within the hour. She called the number on the letterhead 4 times. The vendor services line confirmed the non-renewal each time and offered nothing further. She demanded a supervisor. She was transferred to a recorded message. She called back and demanded a different supervisor. She was transferred to the same recorded message. Patricia Whitfield had spent 40 years being the kind of woman that rooms arranged themselves around. She had never in her life been transferred to a recorded message twice. She called Yvonne. Yvonne called Garrison's attorney. Garrison's attorney had no answers about a transport contract. He was still trying to get answers about an audit. Day 4. 2 Whitfield Funeral Group locations. The Auburn Gresham branch and the South Shore location, 3 blocks from Patricia's dining room where the Sunday dinners happened, failed state transport compliance inspections. Without BLG's cold chain vehicles in rotation, the chain's body transport protocols had lapsed below the state's operational threshold. Inspectors issued temporary closure orders by midday. The story ran on the local news at 6 that evening. A 40-year institution, 2 locations shuttered, compliance failures. The reporter outside the Auburn Gresham branch used the word crisis. In the footage behind him, the parking lot sat empty, the front doors locked, a handwritten sign taped to the glass that said they were temporarily closed and thanked their community for their patience. Patricia watched the broadcast from her living room. She did not say anything for a long time. Day 6. The envelope to the non-profit board arrived without a return address. It contained a single document, a copy of the 2021 grant acceptance letter that Patricia had signed on behalf of her organization, accepting $2.1 million from the Beaumont Group Charitable Foundation without disclosing her relationship to the grant source, in violation of the board's own conflict of interest policy. The board chair called an emergency governance meeting for the following morning. Patricia was asked, by the end of that meeting, to step down from her position pending a full review. The vote was not close. The church community learned about it before sundown. In a neighborhood where Patricia Whitfield's name had been synonymous with dignity and authority for 4 decades, the news moved the way hard news always moves, fast, thorough, and without mercy. Day 7. Garrison's administrative leave became termination. The audit had concluded. $2.1 million in misattributed billings, client accounts reassigned through informal internal transfers to inflate his performance record. The VP promotion he had used to remake his entire professional identity had been built on numbers that were not his. His severance was frozen pending BLG's civil recovery claim. Yvonne found out at 8 in the morning. The Gold Coast apartment lease payment was due that Friday. the lease she had co-signed, the lease premised on the income of a man whose accounts were now frozen by the legal team of a company neither of them had ever thought to look at carefully. She called Teddy. He let it go to voicemail. Day 8. Garrison's attorney submitted a formal discovery request for BLG's full corporate structure documents. The processing period was 48 hours. Standard procedure. The clock started. Garrison spent those 48 hours in the Gold Coast apartment trying to reconstruct how a routine executive review had reached the conclusions it reached. He had been careful. He had been so certain he was careful. Day 10. The documents arrived. Garrison sat at the kitchen table and opened the corporate structure file his attorney had forwarded. He scrolled to the top of the organizational chart. The beneficial owner of the Delaware holding company that controlled BLG's parent entity, which owned Meridian Supply Chain Solutions outright, which had employed Garrison Whitmore as vice president of client strategy for 5 years. He read the name, Theodore Beaumont. He read it again. He called Yvonne. She picked up on the first ring. The silence between them when he said the name lasted a long time. She already knew. She had figured it out 2 days ago. She had spent 2 days trying to decide what to do with the information. She called Teddy. He did not answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice had always carried the particular texture of a woman who expected rooms to arrange themselves accordingly. It did not carry that anymore. What it carried now was something quieter. Something that sounded, for the first time in 12 years, like a woman who understood that she had badly miscalculated the size of what she had dismissed. Teddy listened to the voicemail once, deleted it, and called Franklin to schedule the meeting. They arrived at 9 o'clock. Yvonne came with her attorney, Desmond Craig, who carried a leather portfolio and the particular confidence of a man who believed he understood the terrain. Patricia came because Patricia went everywhere that concerned the Whitfield name, regardless of what anyone advised. Franklin had told Teddy the night before that Patricia had insisted on attending and that Yvonne's team had not objected. Franklin had simply noted it and moved on. In his experience, people who insisted on being present for their own undoing rarely needed to be invited twice. The conference room on the 14th floor looked the same as it always did. The lake through the windows, the carpet that swallowed sound, the long table with the bound folders already placed at precise intervals, which was how Franklin ran every meeting, the documents in position before anyone sat down so that the information was the first thing in the room and the last thing anyone left thinking about. Yvonne sat across from the empty chair at the head of the table. She was composed in the way of a woman who had spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, deciding how she would hold herself. Patricia sat beside her, upright, in the coat she wore to church and to board meetings and to every occasion she had deemed worthy of her full authority. Desmond Craig opened his portfolio. Franklin said that they would begin in a few minutes when his client arrived. Craig said that was fine. Patricia said nothing, but adjusted the position of her handbag, which was the thing she did when she was recalibrating. Teddy walked in at 9:07. He wore a dark suit that he had never worn to a Sunday dinner. He set his jacket on the back of his chair and sat down without rushing. He looked at Yvonne directly, briefly, the way you look at something you have already decided how to handle. He did not look at Patricia. Patricia looked at him. Something moved across her face, not recognition exactly, because she knew exactly who Teddy was, something else. The particular recalibration that happens when a room that was supposed to belong to you begins to feel like someone else's. Franklin opened the first folder. He presented BLG's corporate structure with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. The Delaware holding company, the subsidiary network, the asset schedule. the $42 billion valuation figure. Read aloud in full, without emphasis. The way a doctor reads a number that is simply the number. Desmond Craig's pen stopped moving approximately 40 seconds into the presentation. He did not pick it up again. Franklin placed the Meridian Supply Chain Solutions acquisition document on the table. Purchase price of $340 million. Acquisition date of June 2019. Current status: wholly owned subsidiary of Beaumont Logistics Group. He placed Garrison Whitmore's employment record beside it. 5 years of compensation. The VP promotion. The performance metrics, the audit findings, the civil recovery claim. Then Franklin placed the org chart on the table and turned it so that it faced Yvonne and her attorney. At the top of the chart, in the beneficial owner field of the Delaware holding entity that controlled everything beneath it, was the name Theodore Beaumont. Craig looked at the chart. He looked at Teddy. He looked back at the chart. He did not say anything for a long time. Patricia opened her mouth. Franklin said quietly, and without looking up from his documents, that this was not her meeting, and that she was present as a courtesy, and that if she spoke again, he would ask her to wait in the lobby. He said it the way gravity operates, without drama, without negotiation, simply as a condition of the room. Patricia closed her mouth. Teddy waited until the silence had fully settled. Then he turned to Yvonne, and he spoke directly to her, unhurried, the way he had always spoken, in the measured cadence of a man who had never needed volume to be heard. He told her he had not come to this room to humiliate her. He wanted her to understand that clearly. What he had come for was the one thing the Sunday dinner table had never offered him, the chance to be seen accurately by the person who was supposed to know him best before he walked out of her life for the last time. He told her he had built BLG the year before they met. He told her he had kept it from her because he had wanted to be known as a man before he was known as a resource, and because he had watched her family's relationship to money closely enough in those first months to understand what the information would do to the room every time he walked into it. He told her he had spent 12 years watching her apologize for him, at dinners, at family gatherings, in the pauses before she answered questions about what he did. He had watched her build a social world in which he was the one thing she was not quite sure how to explain away. Then he said it, slowly, without anger, without theatre. You spent 12 years letting your mother call me temporary, Yvonne, in my presence, at my table, with my food on the plate. And the man you left me for? He has been punching in under my name for 5 years and never once knew whose companies signed his checks. I was not the man you married down to. I was the ceiling neither of you ever thought to look up at. Yvonne's composure left her the way composure leaves people who have built it carefully over a long time, not all at once, but in stages, each one visible. Her eyes first, then the set of her jaw, then the hands on the table that she looked down at as though she did not know what to do with them. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a breath. It was the sound of a woman who had spent 40 years being certain, encountering something she had not accounted for. Teddy let the silence hold. Then he stood, he buttoned his jacket, he turned to Franklin and thanked him. He reached into his breast pocket and removed his logistics manager ID badge, the one he had carried for years as cover, the one that said his name and his cover title and the name of the subsidiary he had built the fiction around, and he set it flat on the conference table. He did not look at Yvonne again. He did not look at Patricia. He walked out of the conference room, down the hallway, into the elevator, and out through the lobby doors onto Michigan Avenue, where the October air came off the lake cold and clear, and the city moved around him the way it always had, indifferent and magnificent, and Teddy Beaumont walked into it without looking back. What came after was not revenge, it was architecture. 6 months after the Sunday dinner on Euclid Avenue, the architecture was complete. Garrison Whitmore's termination was made permanent 30 days after the audit concluded. BLG's civil recovery claim moved through arbitration with the efficiency of a process that had the documentation to support every number it cited. Garrison settled for $890,000, nearly his entire liquid savings, most of which had come from bonuses paid out by a company he now understood he had never actually worked for in any meaningful sense. His name circulated through the Midwest freight industry the way bad names circulate in tight industries, quietly, thoroughly, and with finality. No firm in the sector made him an offer. The corner office, the Northwestern MBA, the business cards, the entire scaffolding of the identity he had presented to Yvonne as evidence of his worth, all of it dismantled piece by piece by the machinery of a company whose owner he had never thought to look up. Patricia Whitfield was removed from both non-profit boards by the end of the governance review. The process was formal and documented and offered her no clean exit. 2 of the 8 Whitfield Funeral Group locations, the Auburn Gresham branch and the South Shore location, were sold to cover the operational losses that followed the transport contract lapse, losses that compounded faster than anyone had anticipated once the compliance failures hit the news. The family kept 6 locations and a name that still meant something in Chicago, but it meant something different now. In the church community, in the neighborhood, among the people who had watched Patricia hold court at family dinners for 4 decades, there was a new piece of information permanently attached to her story. The woman who had called Teddy Beaumont temporary had been, without knowing it, dependent on him the entire time. Communities do not forget that kind of irony, they carry it. Yvonne's divorce settlement was finalized on Teddy's terms. She retained her personal assets, her savings, her car, the things that were unambiguously hers before and during the marriage, and nothing that touched BLG's corporate structure, which Desmond Craig's team had been unable to reach from the beginning. She vacated the Gold Coast apartment in February. She did not call Teddy again after the conference room. Whatever she had intended to say in that voicemail, whatever calculation had been behind it, she seemed to understand by the time the settlement was signed that the accounting was complete. The Chicago Business Advocate ran its profile of Theodore Beaumont in the March issue. It was the first time his name and face had appeared together in print anywhere. The photograph showed him in an office that looked nothing like the cover story he had maintained for 12 years. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of room that reflects the actual weight of a man's work back at him without apology. The profile detailed BLG's history from the single Joliet freight contract through 31 acquisitions, covering 18 years of growth that had occurred entirely outside public view. The journalist noted that Beaumont was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most consequential logistics executives in the country, and that until that month, essentially, no one had known it. The profile generated calls from 3 national publications and an invitation to speak at a logistics industry summit in Atlanta. Teddy accepted the Atlanta invitation. He declined the others. He was more interested in what was happening in Englewood. The Beaumont Foundation had announced its scholarship endowment 2 weeks before the profile ran, $4 million designated for students from the Englewood community pursuing degrees in logistics, engineering, and business. The endowment was named for Odessa Beaumont, who had worked 41 years at a dry cleaner on Halstead and saved money the way other people saved breath, and whose $22,000 bequest had, through the particular alchemy of her grandson's discipline and hunger and refusal to be made small, become something she could not have imagined and would have entirely recognized. The first cohort of Odessa Beaumont scholars was announced in April. 12 students. Teddy attended the announcement ceremony at a community center 6 blocks from the house where he grew up. He did not give a speech. He sat in the front row and applauded each name. There was a woman beside him at the foundation event. Her name was Renata Ellis. She ran a community development organization that had been working in Englewood for 11 years, and she had the kind of composure that comes not from performance, but from genuine purpose, the composure of someone who has spent a long time doing work that matters and has stopped needing it acknowledged. She and Teddy spoke briefly before the ceremony began. She laughed once at something he said, a real laugh, unguarded, and he smiled in the way of a man who had not had much occasion for that particular kind of moment in a long time. Nothing more was said about her. Nothing more needed to be. That is where this story ends. Not with a courtroom, not with a dramatic public reckoning, but with a man sitting in a community center in the neighborhood that made him, watching 12 young people hear their names called beside a woman who knew exactly who he was and found it entirely sufficient. Here is what Theodore Beaumont's story says, underneath everything else it says. Real power does not announce itself at dinner tables. It does not need to be recognized by people who have already decided what you are worth. It builds quietly over years in documents that bear no famous name, in contracts won through preparation rather than presentation, in the kind of work that gets done in the early morning before anyone is watching, and when the moment finally comes, when the world that dismissed you must reckon with what you actually built, you do not raise your voice. You simply let the architecture speak. So here is the question this story leaves with you. If you had been sitting at that table, if you had spent 12 years being called temporary by people who were living without knowing it inside something you built, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly with the way Teddy did? Or would you have done something different? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, hit that like button before you go. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. There is another story coming that you do not want to miss. We will see you in the next one.